Thank you, and welcome back, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Give me a thumbs up. Awesome. Okay. Thanks again, Laura. I'm Michaela Gentili. I'm Program Manager at the Parks Consortium. And for our first session, like she mentioned, we're going to expand on the morning's conversation about climate change solutions. I'm really excited to introduce to you Ellie Cohen, CEO of the Climate Center, who is joining us to share a path to a climate-safe California. Ellie is a leader in catalyzing cross-boundary collaborative and just solutions to climate change and environmental degradation. An honors graduate of Duke University in botany and Harvard's Kennedy School of Government, Ellie has received numerous accolades, including the Beyond Duke Alumni Award for Service and Leadership, the National Park Service Pacific West Region Partnership Award, and the Bay Nature Environmental Hero Award. She was named one of the 100 women taking the lead to save our planet in the United States by the National Women's History Project, and was selected to participate in the Climate Reality Project's second training with Vice President Al Gore. Most recently, Ellie served as president and CEO of Point Blue Conservation Science, where she and the organization's over 160 scientists developed climate-smart solutions for wildlife and people. And among her collaborative leadership roles, Ellie served as an invited member of the National Adaptation Forum Steering Committee, the California Adaptation Forum's Advisory Committee, and the San Francisco Bay Area's Resilient by Design Research Advisory Committee. Ellie currently serves as an appointed member of the County of Marin Drawdown Sequestration Collaborative, San Anselmo Sustainability Commission, and Marin Municipal Water District's E-Bike Community Advisory Committee. A very warm welcome to Ellie, and I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you so much. That's really an honor to be here. Let's see, it's not letting me share right now. Let's try again. There you go. Okay, my screen. I'll put this on. Thank you so much. Thank you, Michaela, and thanks again, Laura, and everybody. It's been a great morning, and my appreciation to all the panelists from this morning as well, and everyone for the great questions. Yes, today I'm going to speak about the path to a climate-safe California to reach net negative emissions by 2030. I will start off with a little history, not history, but an introduction to some of the latest climate science and why we feel it's so urgent to move up current policy timelines in California and globally. Then talk about our climate safe campaign, what the key pillars of it are, and end with a vision for the future if we do everything we know we need to do today. So just again to introduce the Climate Center, our mission is speed and scale greenhouse gas reductions. It was founded in 2001. Anne Hancock is a co-founder and recruited me % clean energy, which is pretty phenomenal. This is an example in one sector of speed and scale greenhouse gas reductions. There's much more to do, but it's exciting to see the kind of progress that can be made in the state. Laura asked me to actually talk a little bit about COVID-19 and climate change. This really shows it all, this cartoon. I can't see everyone's faces, but it shows two scientists, or quote unquote scientists in a white lab coat, not field scientists, but our stereotype of scientists, looking to one side, seeing the COVID-19 bump, and then thinking, okay, it'll be great, we can flatten the curve and this will be over, and behind them, climate change, which is lurking and already actually having major impacts on people and nature across the world. Very powerful cartoon. In fact, I think I'm going to end my talk right here, Laura. No, I'll keep going. So what are some of the lessons, I guess, from COVID-19 that can apply to climate change? Number one, we have to heed the science. We have to listen to experts. Doesn't mean we do exactly what scientists say. We still have a democratic process, but clearly that has not been done at the federal level. And very sadly, there are apparently quite a few deaths that did not need to happen had science been heeded. And so advanced preparation saves lives. Tipping points happen quickly and abruptly. If you compare recent charts that show unemployment from the mid-60s to today, you see this big spike in the last couple of months. And then you look at the chart that Patrick showed us earlier of climate change over centuries, and you see the same thing. And so while climate is a little slower than COVID, it is also much bigger and longer term. We are only as resilient as the most vulnerable. We have to take care of the most vulnerable. If the most vulnerable in our communities are swept away with COVID-19, it means we all are. The same is true with climate change. Healthy ecosystems sustain life and make us more resilient. No question, COVID-19, if we were not destroying habitats and interacting with wildlife at these wet markets for wildlife, this would not have happened, apparently, at least based on the latest science. We have shared responsibility for our future. It's really about we, not me. But at the same time, individuals do make a difference, and we need coordinated government action. So it really means we need action at all different levels. And I think one of the hopeful things is that COVID-19 has shown us that we can act really quickly when we are threatened. We are investing billions, actually trillions. Behavior change is happening. Most of us are home and not driving our cars, not to celebrate this at all, but to say it is possible when we have the political will. And while we have empty freeways, and this to me is just an unbelievable photo from Los Angeles, and we have blue skies, it's not something to celebrate. It doesn't equal climate change mitigation. Just last week, we hit 417 parts per million of carbon dioxide for the first time in human history in the atmosphere. It's more than 100 parts per million from when I was born. It's really quite something. And I think another way to look at this is thinking of this bathtub analogy. The projections are that the drop in emissions due to COVID will be roughly 5.5% this year. According to the IPCC report that Patrick referred to stay below 1.5 C warming, we'll need about 7.6% reduction every year. There are some reports now that are saying that, in fact, this year we may even have a 10% drop. But all that means is that that spigot is being turned down some. It's not turned off. And we still have that bathtub full, or the atmosphere full of warming emissions. To get to a climate safe future, we not only have to turn off the spigot, we also have to empty out the tub. And that brings me to what the UN IPCC 1.5 degrees Celsius report said in October 2018, which has really been the basis for a lot of climate action around the world, from governments, from institutions, from national parks. And what was their finding? Their recommendation was that emissions have to decline essentially by half, by 45% by 2030 to meet this goal, 1.5 degrees Celsius, or limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming, or 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit since the industrial era, achieving net zero or carbon neutral by 2050, and up to 1,000 gigatons, or a trillion tons of carbon dioxide equivalent have to be removed from the atmosphere over the decades ahead. That's a lot of what governments are referring to these days. Here's my problem with this, with all due respect to Patrick and his colleagues at the IPCC. This is a consensus document. It is the most conservative recommendation. Even though it seems dramatic to cut emissions in half by 2030 globally, it is not nearly enough to do what's needed based on the latest science today. Based on this new science, we have to do much more sooner. And I'm going to share with you just really quickly some of the latest science that just in the past few months. This is from April 2020. Essentially a prediction of abrupt ecosystem collapse, that when we have a high percentage of species that are facing the same kinds of harmful climate conditions, that the entire ecosystem can collapse. The projections are, this study just came out a few days ago. The projections are that this will start within this decade in tropical oceans. The oceans drive our weather, and they secure our ability to live on land. And so this is very concerning for the thousands of species that could be demolished, killed, wiped out. This is a picture from the blob up in Alaska, where you had a major ocean heating event, and there was a huge die-off of common murres. We'll see much more of this with many more species. And the key is deep emissions cuts this decade, which could save thousands of species. Another study came out. 3/4 of the world's oceans are speeding up. This was not expected to happen until 2100. It's an indication that Earth might be more sensitive to climate change than most scientists thought. That's very concerning, because it could mean if we add just a little more emissions, we may be accelerating tipping points. Abrupt permafrost thaw. A new study from February found that probably 20% of the permafrost in the Arctic is susceptible to this sloughing off, and this will break down the frozen soil and release carbon dioxide, methane, perhaps other viruses and other kinds of challenges to life as we know it. It doubles previous emissions estimates, and according to the lead author, this is not in any of the climate models, including that 1.5C report. And she asks, how realistic are our projections if we're not including permafrost feedbacks? We can definitely stave off the worst consequences if we act in the next decade. And yet more scientists here talking about the fact that 9 of 15 global tipping points are already underway. These were just identified about 10 years ago. And the challenge is that if we don't slow these down and prevent the others from being activated, we will see a domino effect that will lead to an uninhabitable hothouse climate if we don't act soon. One of the lead authors on that and a lead climate scientist globally is Johann Ruckstrom from Germany. As he said in December, we do not want to push the on buttons of runaway global warming. The next decade is our window, with consequences for all future generations. Another study that did 5 million climate pathways analyses, much more than the IPCC uses. And the scientists' conclusion, out of all of these, there were only a handful of pathways that had a positive climate future, that we must aggressively pursue carbon neutral energy by 2030 and hope for some luck for a tolerable climate future, that the Earth is not as sensitive as it seems. The Earth's climate system isn't as sensitive. We have 11,000 scientists back in November warning of a climate emergency. And right here in California and in the West, a new study just came out last week. The Western US is now in a global warming induced mega drought. We've known about this, but this is evidence that we actually are in it, so that the period from 2000 to 2018 was the second driest in 1,200 years. What really was the anomaly was the 20th century, during which time California went from maybe 2 million residents to 40 million, and built an infrastructure completely on an anomalous condition, which is that we had more rain than we normally do. On top of a drought that we would be having now, we have global warming, which has made it go from a moderate drought to extreme. And a mega drought is defined by multi-decadal drought. And fall fire weather. That another study came out in March that fall fire weather days have doubled since 1980 in California. It goes along with the other one. With all of this, land use changes, habitat loss, more pollution, increase these impacts and reduce resilience. I have a picture on the top right here with microfibers and microplastics, which I'm not going to address today, but could do a whole talk about plastics, fossil fuels, and the relationship to climate change and human health. And at the bottom, the governor just approved 24 new permits for fracking in Kern County, and many of these facilities are right near where people live. And we heard earlier about some of the challenges with being exposed, any communities that live right on the front lines being exposed to these dangerous compounds. And the health impacts, which I just referred to, these polluted air shortens lives, makes people more vulnerable to the worst ravages of COVID-19. And extreme heat, more than any other kind of climate extremes, is the most dangerous. And it's worse in red line neighborhoods, lower income neighborhoods, and they can be hotter by 5 to 12 degrees Fahrenheit, which means it can be deadly. And of course, COVID-19. So I ask all of you, are net zero emissions enough? Is carbon neutrality enough? Balancing carbon emissions with carbon removal? I can't hear you, but I know you're saying no. The goal has to, oh yeah, there you go, thank you. The goal really has to be that we need to start drawdown no later than 2030, and that means net negative emissions. So it's more sequestration than emissions, so that California becomes a net carbon sink, that we have massive emissions reductions with increasing sequestration, and we can reverse some impacts. We won't reverse all of them. I showed you that bathtub. We have a lot of energy in the system that we're not going to get rid of overnight, and we're going to have a challenging few decades ahead. But we, especially in California, where California has been a leader globally, can make a huge difference. And we have the capacity, we have the ability to do this if we have the political will. So just a little inspiration here. What are other governments doing around the world? California had been a leader. I'd say we've fallen behind a little bit recently. Finland has a goal of achieving carbon neutrality by 2035 without carbon offsets. Uruguay wants to have net negative emissions or a net carbon sink by 2030 with major investments in wind and increased forest cover. Norway, despite all their fossil fuel exports, is banning new internal combustion engine car sales starting in 2025. And already in Norway, 60% of their new car sales are electric. In Denmark, their goal is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to 70% below 1990 levels by 2030. The city of Copenhagen wants to be carbon neutral by 2025. Rhode Island announced a couple months ago they're committed to 100% renewable energy by 2030. Santa Monica, a great example of what local governments can do, is committed to 80% below 1990 levels by 2030, committed to converting half of their gas vehicle trips to walking or bikes or scooters or skateboards by 2030, and water self-sufficiency by 2023, zero waste by 2030. Very impressive. And California is not doing this. So what are our current policies that exist today on the books? We have an executive order from 2005 to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to 80% below 1990 levels by 2050. It's too late. We have SB 32, reduce greenhouse gas emissions to 40% below 1990 levels by 2030. Is it enough? No. SB 100, achieve 60% renewable energy by 2030 and 100% by 2045. We can do better than this. And executive order from Jerry Brown to achieve carbon neutrality by 2045 and maintain net negative emissions after. Too late. We need to do more much sooner. It just is not enough per the science and the climate reality. So here are the latest measured emissions in California from 2017. We heard a little bit about the buildings earlier. Transportation is the largest measured sector. And just no offense to anybody who drives an SUV, but SUVs, according to a study that came out last fall, are the second biggest cause of emissions rise globally. That SUVs drivers, if they were their own country, ranked 7th in the world for emissions, more than the UK and Netherlands combined. And then a big challenge for us in California, you can't solve a problem that you're not measuring. And so while we are measuring all these emissions that equal to 424 million metric tons a year right now, we're not counting everything. We're not counting what are known as consumption-based or out-of-boundary emissions for the embedded goods and services. It's the product and food manufacturing and disposal, the whole life cycle of products, air travel and other transportation outside of the boundary, and emissions from production of natural gas and fuels and foreign fuels that are refined in California. I took this picture on an electric car trip down to LA and back. Just in one direction, we probably saw 25 Prime trucks. So I changed their logo to say there's more emissions to Prime. And I just want to show for here in Marin, and this was part of an effort with Marin Drawdown, that measured emissions are estimated to only be 1/3 of all emissions in 2017. So if you change that graph that we just saw for the state, and you add in the out-of-boundary and consumption-based emissions, it might change what you prioritize to address in terms of policy and what really needs to happen to ensure a climate-safe future for us all. So we need more aggressive policies and accelerated timelines now. The climate-safe California vision is that by 2025, California will have enacted the bold policies required by science to dramatically reduce emissions, become a net carbon sink, and secure resilient communities by 2030, inspiring global action. We don't become climate safe by only California acting. It requires global efforts, but it is a huge step in the right direction because California is the 5th largest economy in the world and has been a leader in the past. So our goal is to accelerate existing state policy timelines to achieve 80% below 1990 greenhouse gas levels and net negative emissions by 2030. Here's a chart to just give you a sense. The red bar on the left shows the 1990 baseline year of 431 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent emissions. The gold bar shows the 2017 actual that I just showed you on that other graph. Not a huge difference, and we have a long way to go to get to zero, as you can see. The next bar is 40% below 1990 by 2030, which is our current law. That's what we're trying to get to in California, but as we've talked about, it is not enough. What we really need to get to is what is in the green circle. It can be some combination of these. It could be 80% below 1990 levels, which gets us to 86 million metric tons, and 100 million metric tons extra of sequestration across our 104 million acres in California by 2030, leaving us with minus 14 million metric tons and the beginning of drawdown. And perhaps there's a different combination, or there are certainly different combinations. Could be less sequestration and more cuts. It could be fewer cuts and more sequestration, but you get the general idea of the goal here. And here is one example of the breakdown by the different categories that the state is measuring. If this is our 80% scenario, except for electricity getting to 100% renewable. And these slides will all be shared with you so you can take a look at it. And they're also available on our website at theclimatecenter.org or climatesafeca.org. What will be critical for our success, as I talked about from the COVID-19 lessons, is that we have to ensure a just transition for workers and prioritize lower income communities, because we are only as climate safe as the most vulnerable. We have to support workers who are dependent on fossil fuel enterprises and help make that transition as smooth as possible. I can say for myself, if my health insurance and my daily ability to provide food for my family were dependent on fossil fuel production and I had no alternative, there is no way that I would support climate action, even when I know what's ahead for us. And so we have to make it easy for people to make these transitions. We have to make it easier for lower income people to be part of the clean energy economy. And we have to create more jobs in building, construction, and other trades that help solve the climate crisis and do it together. So the kinds of policies that we need enacted as required by science, we have to accelerate the phase out of fossil fuel development, production, and use. We have to increase sequestration. We have to invest in community resilience, and we have to fund climate action. This is going to cost a lot of money. What we're seeing right now is that the state has spent, as of a couple of weeks ago, $6 billion more than was projected in the budget. We know we can spend money, we can make money. We can make money to spend in things if we determine politically that they're urgent. This is urgent. We should be spending much more than $6 billion a year specifically on climate solutions. So first, I'll go through this quickly. Accelerate the phase out of fossil fuels. We should immediately halt all new oil and gas drilling and infrastructure development. We need to get to 100% greenhouse gas free and decentralized electricity and energy storage by 2030. We need to electrify almost everything. We have to transition to sustainable mobility, and that means beginning the phase out of fossil fuel powered vehicles and cars, trucks, buses, ships, starting in 2025 or no later than 2025. We should be flipping the Caltrans budget. Instead of 80% on freeways and more infrastructure, that's a dead end for us, that we spend that on sustainable modes of transportation. We need to invest in affordable housing near jobs and transition to telecommuting when possible. Zero emissions vehicles are growing in California, but we need more of the charging infrastructure. There's been a 33% increase from 2018 to 2019. The current goal is to have 5 million electric cars by 2030 out of 26 million. It's not enough. We have to get to at least 10 million, maybe it's even more. And even better, we have to get people out of cars. And we heard earlier, great presentation about the building electrification. We have to have a huge increase in that and efficiency. Buildings are about a quarter of our measured greenhouse gas emissions. Around, to date, I believe 20 California cities have enacted, I don't want to call it natural gas anymore, I'm going to call it methane gas bans for new buildings. In addition to the health impacts we heard about earlier, methane is a very powerful global warming compound. It, in its life cycle of 10 to 20 years in the atmosphere, is around 84 times more powerful than carbon dioxide. And it's believed that part of the dramatic increase in the impacts of global warming that we're seeing globally, that acceleration could be because there's been a huge increase in methane in the atmosphere. It's one study from Cornell has shown that that increase is coming from at least 1/3 of it from increased natural gas fracking in the United States and in Canada. Fracking and natural gas is not a bridge to clean energy, and it may end up being having been a very dangerous step for us in terms of addressing the climate crisis. And big efforts to enact zero emission building codes. Another thing, especially for the parks to consider, is can we ban some of this gas powered equipment that we're using, not just on lawns in residential areas, but in our parks? Just a 1 hour of a leaf blower use equals driving 1,100 miles from LA to Denver. These two-stroke engines are very dirty. And here in Marin, there are multiple efforts to ban them, including in my town here in San Anselmo. We'll be introducing a two-stroke engine ban resolution to our town council in a couple of weeks. Second main category, and I'm not touching on everything, but just some of the key areas. Increase in sequestration. We believe that we can add much more than 100 million metric tons. My back of the envelope calculations are around 135 million metric tons a year. This doesn't last forever, but it at least gives us a stepping stone until new net negative or sequestering technologies are available. In the meantime, since they probably won't be at scale until at least the 2030s, we have to use nature to help us sequester carbon while providing all kinds of other benefits, including increased resilience to drought, to flooding, and sustaining biodiversity. And we can do this through carbon farming and gardening. This can be in urban and rural areas. Climate smart habitat restoration that we heard a little bit about earlier on land and the coast, and enhancing protected habitats. Carbon farming has huge potential. Conservatively, roughly 1 ton of sequestered carbon per acre. And so theoretically, on 20 million acres, 20 million arable acres in California, we could sequester at least 20 million metric tons. But you add compost to it, and you add some of these other steps that are listed here, and we've seen people get to 5 times that or 10 times that even, and make a huge difference, especially in drought-prone areas. Riparian restoration also has enormous potential and scale. This is a picture of Point Blue's straw project, student and teachers restoring a watershed. We have, in the Central Valley alone, 95% of riparian habitat has been lost. So huge potential for restoration with huge benefits for water, biodiversity, and our communities. Third category, investing in community resilience. It's been required for a few years by SB 379 to implement resilience plans in all of our jurisdictions, our counties and cities and towns in California. Not a penny has been allocated to that. So it's time to put money to that so that we can actually do this. And on the right, you see pictures of people walking around on very smoky days. We know we're in for an extended fire season this year. We will have more dangerous smoky days. We have to plan for flood, for fire, and other kinds of climate and heat in particular. So having resiliency centers and resiliency officers that the state funds to actually carry out these programs. And at the Climate Center, one of our current priorities is implementing clean energy community microgrids with electric vehicle storage so that it helps promote electrical vehicles at the same time as promoting clean energy and community-based efforts, starting with critical facilities in lower income communities. Many of you might know that PG&E, in addressing these public, the PSPS, I would call it the PSBS, but their planned outages certainly got a lot of critical feedback. And so they've decided to make a plan to have all kinds of new natural gas or methane gas backup generators in places like San Rafael and Green Bay and Ukiah, all over its area. And obviously that's not acceptable. There are leaks all over the place. We need to phase out natural gas as soon as possible. Instead of perpetuating 100-year-old grid architecture and this transmission network that's prone to failure and likely to start wildfires, we think it's time to build a new integrated and decentralized clean energy grid. We call that community energy resilience. That's clean, affordable, resilient, equitable, and safe. And we believe there's something like 35,000 critical facilities in the state. That includes healthcare, schools, first fire and police, and other kinds of public service entities. And so we need to start with those. And we have worked on a bill here called Community Energy Resilience Planning, SB 1314 to do just that, to bring money for local communities to plan for and implement this local energy resilience projects. Unfortunately, with the amount of money that's being spent on addressing COVID, the state legislature has instructed the state senators and assembly people to reduce the number of bills this year and expect to not have nearly as much money to spend as we thought 3 months ago. But there are still some bills like SB 1215 from Stern that supports community microgrids that some of this may be attached to. We consider this critical to addressing fire and the public health aspects of that. And last, funding climate action. We need new progressive financing mechanisms. The cap and trade that brings in roughly $1 billion a year, and that most environmental groups are fighting over those monies instead of working together towards some common larger goal that we need to achieve based on the science. We need to find some new mechanisms. One idea that we've had, it's based on something that is from Greenpeace UK. Right now, there are not a lot of frequent flyers, but when the economy gets coming back, we will, I don't know if we'll see the same level of flying, but based on the number of passengers in 2018 in California, at the top 8 airports, there were 240 million passengers. So if I flew to LA and back, I was a passenger twice. If we charged $10 per passenger, we would raise $2.4 billion just from that. And I would consider that a very progressive form of a tax or a fee. We should be implementing much more on green bonds, and we should be looking at progressive carbon taxes like fee and dividend that charge a fee at the source of fossil fuels and return some or all of that to households as a dividend. This is being worked on nationally. We should be doing this here in California. There are other approaches as well. My guess is, as I said earlier, that we will probably need at least $12 billion a year based on our current budget of around $222 billion a year. Okay, I hear my alarm. And so this is our vision of the future. Here is the platform that I just reviewed with you. Phase 1, how are we going to do it? We are working to get endorsements of our climate safe platform, and you can go to climatesafeca.org to do that. Securing initial partners for a new statewide partnership that has to include labor and healthcare and environmental justice and environment groups and businesses, local government, other partners. Right now, the climate movement is very siloed. And unless we start working together and finding common ground on this bigger picture of where we need to be by 2030, we're going to fall way short of what we need to do. We have to engage experts in science-based pathway development. We have to draft white papers and opinion columns, get opinion leaders identified, target communities, launch strategic communications, secure early policy wins in Sacramento. Our goal is to raise $25 million. We've already raised almost $1 million, and we want to raise $2 million by the summer. If you know anybody who can write a check for that, let me know. Or if somebody wants to apply for our new position of development director, we'd love that. Let me know. Here are some of our endorsements. I've run out of time, so I won't read those right now. But the bottom line is that we can and are making a difference. We have to be bold, have to take risks, and we have to innovate for a healthy, equitable future. I love this picture because this guy from Oakland wanted to ride his bike to San Francisco, and he made a bike boat. We can do anything if we put our minds to it, and we certainly can reverse the climate crisis, no question. Look at what is now GGNRA. This could have been housing, and it wasn't because of a few people that stood up and said, we're not going to let this get developed. Or San Francisco Bay could have been basically San Francisco River, but it didn't happen that way because we stood up, or the generation before us stood up. And we can do that again. One person can make a difference, as Greta Thunberg has shown, and together we make a much, much bigger difference. So join us in endorsing the Climate Safe California platform, a public pledge of support for California to accelerate aggressive climate policy, and we can inspire states and countries to greater action for a climate safe Earth. Other actions you can take: get involved in local government, speak to your elected officials at all levels, demand a green and clean and equitable stimulus fund package. It's got to be a just recovery. It can't be recovery for the airlines or for the biggest industries and not the rest of us. Support AB 345, which is a bill that sets back oil and gas infrastructure away from frontline communities and their schools and homes. This is a no-brainer. This has got to happen and pass in California. We need to divest and invest for a climate safe future. We need to make energy efficiency and electrical improvements, as we heard earlier. And you can check Bayren and hear more about the rebates that are available. Ditch the SUV and make your next car an EV, or like Patrick, get rid of your car, use your bike and use mass transit. Ask your city council to develop and implement a community energy resilience plan and climate action plan. Reduce airplane travel. We're all doing that right now. Purchase and lease solar, wind, or 100% green power through your local community choice agency. Use mass transit, shared transit, and other micromobility. Insulate your home. Eat locally grown organic food. Avoid industrial grown meats entirely. Switch to electric lawn equipment, appliances, and hot water heaters and heat pumps. Engage young people, or they should engage people like me who are old in education, habitat restoration, and policy action. The young people are where it's at. They've really catalyzed an amazing amount of political action globally. Use less, waste less, refuse, reduce, reuse, take action. And this is what the headlines can look like. In fact, this headline is from Monday. U.S. renewables produce more electricity than coal during the first 2 months of 2020 as solar grows and wind grows. It's phenomenal. It's happening, and we have to help make it continue to happen, and we have to accelerate it. And California has helped make it happen in the rest of the country and the world. We can continue to be a leader. Here's what future headlines will look like if we do what we know we need to do today. California is the first state to reach net negative emissions, kickstarts the nation and the world into speed and scale climate action. That's 10 years from now. We can be celebrating a positive, healthy future, a positive, healthy, and equitable future for all of us. Here's August 2035. Drawdown and resilience are increasing despite record-breaking drought, thanks to climate-friendly natural and working lands management. Anybody recognize where this photo is taken? And look at this. The GGNRA Green Team, GGPC, and Presidio Trust are awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom for Climate Leadership, April 2040. Why did it take them so long? We don't know. And Wednesday, November 6, 2040, the elections 20 years from now. Global Climate Union authorizes 420 trillion in Healthy Planet Accords. We're on track to get back to 350 parts per million in a safe climate. Ecosystems, the economy, and communities are healthy and resilient. Soils and vegetation are sequestering carbon at scale. Wildlife populations are recovering. And who won the presidency? The Sunrise Party, the leaders of the future. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Ellie. Thank you so much for offering both, that sobering message in light of the temporary drop in emissions we're seeing, and the hope that it's really possible to do what we need to. And in fact, we seem to know a lot of what that is already. I'm going to go to Tanya, who's monitoring our chat box. Tanya, are there questions for Ellie?
Hi, yes, we've got quite a few questions and quite a few comments. I'm going to start with one of them about sequestration strategies, which are the most impactful, maybe correlated. Ellie can talk about the drawdown book and whether she feels that's still a useful resource.
Yeah, so first about the drawdown effort. It's a global effort, and so what it's prioritizing initially, the initial drawdown was for 2050 globally. That's not the same as California. So just to be clear about that, that doesn't mean that there's a ton of great information there, and I'm very excited about it. There's a new update to it that came out recently that's focused on the short term, and I personally encourage them to do that. I said, if you're focused on 2050 and the IPCC came out with a report saying we have to cut emissions essentially in half by 2030, why not come up with solutions that are geared towards 2030? And so I'm sure they got that feedback from others as well. And there's some wonderful ideas in there. But just remember again that that's a global focus. So we here in California have our unique set of circumstances. And I believe that means we can do certain things different from others, some things that'll be very similar. So we think about what are the best ways to sequester carbon. The biggest opportunities through natural sequestration, as opposed to those carbon capture technologies, which are just not at scale yet, are where we have the most disturbed habitat. So to me, that means really croplands. are actually some of the places, and brownfields in cities are the places where you can make the biggest difference. I even think of the Presidio and the huge parade grounds that are, it's really just a dirt lot. Like, let's use it to sequester carbon. Let's not save it for a once a year parade. Let's use every lawn, every park, open space that we have to plant native grasses that have long roots that open up the soil. So when it does rain, it holds as much water as deeply as possible and then can sequester more carbon, supports more biodiversity as well, and helps us be more resilient to things like heat extremes. A study came out, I think 2 years ago, that showed that if you just manage croplands with knowledge that we have today, with cover crops and other kinds of approaches to improve the soil health, that you could sequester 1/5 of global emissions just doing that. And it's such a no-brainer. Today in California, we have approximately, I think, a $25 million out of a $222 billion budget allocated to healthy soils. Is that enough? No way. No way. When we can spend $6 billion on a health emergency, and climate already is a health emergency, will only become that much worse. Let's spend the money we know we need to spend, and let's invest it in healthy soils and healthy habitats. I believe just on the healthy soil side, it will cost $25 billion over 10 years. And we will be very grateful in 10 years to have done that. It'll help on food production, on biodiversity and resilience. I'll shut up.
No, please don't ever shut up, Ellie. Keep going. Here's an easy question for you. Is there any way California can leverage an end to the $20 billion in annual federal subsidies that go to the fossil fuel industry?
Yes, I think we have a role to play in that. But I think first, I think we should absolutely be doing that, but I think we also have to do it within California. So I think our strategy at the Climate Center, we talked about if we could do anything on climate change in the context of the climate emergency, what would we do from a policy point of view to make the biggest difference? And we thought about focusing nationally, and obviously under the current administration, that's just not going anywhere. So we decided to focus on California. And when we do things here in California, I can tell you, I've gone to represented Point Blue at some of the UN climate meetings with 20,000 people from all over the world who are passionate, like all of us here today are, about addressing climate change and protecting nature. And every time I would introduce myself, I never said I was from the United States. I said I was from California. They figured it out. But when I would say I was from California, people would look at me as though rays were emanating from my head, like, California, like that. If only we could be in California. Well, we're here and we know what our shortcomings are, but we also know that when we do great things, we set the standard for the world. We can do it. We can do it on climate change. We can do it by not underwriting fossil fuels in our own state, and by, instead of opening up new permits for fracking, putting money to pay for people to use Kern County as a way of demonstrating how we can transition people out of the oil and gas industry into jobs that are clean energy and safe and healthy for our communities and for our future.
So here's a bit of a follow-up question to that. There are a couple other questions about methane that I'm hoping we can get to too, but kind of a follow-up question to that is, how do you suggest that we best lobby for policy changes and for specific actions?
So I am biased to grassroots action. I was part of a national campaign in the late 1980s that changed 12 or 15 key votes in Congress and changed the direction. It was actually around Contra aid in stopping U.S. intervention in Nicaragua. It was amazing to be part of that and to see how targeted grassroots action can make a huge difference. So that's part of it. There's one study from Harvard that shows that you only need 3.5% of the population, like most social change movements around the world that have caused dramatic changes have happened when roughly 3.5% of the population believed in it. We don't need 50%, we don't need 25%, we only need 3.5%. And my experience was even fewer to actually be actively engaged in.
Correction.
Yes. And then the other thing is just to be sure that that all of us across the climate movement, we all have our issues that are critical, but we have to find a way to work together. and have some kind of
Right.
common goal in order to build a framework that we can all work together towards.